but I won't fret about it. Speaking of fretting, for the Volume 4, Don't Fret, I've chosen this Fender Mustang as a good example of a sturdy neck with a rosewood fingerboard, no binding, and desperate need of a fret job. I can't bend a note on it without buzzing. To go along with it, I'm using this Gibson jazz guitar because it's loaded with pearl, it's got an ebony fingerboard, and it's bound. There's an awful lot of material to put into this course, so we're going to get right with it. I'll be moving at a faster pace than I did in Volume 1 and 2, so if you have any problems, put the pause still on and go back and listen to it again. I've got a lot to squeeze in an hour and a half. Come along with me. We'll start with the Fender. To use my method of fretting, you must be able to adjust the neck, and I can't quite get in there with my screwdriver. If you run into that kind of a problem and you can't adjust it, remove the neck and take some of the material off the pickguard there and the body if necessary. You've got to be able to adjust the neck with string pressure on. Put a little colored lacquer on it when you're done and mix a little yellow and white together. I wouldn't do this on a vintage Fender guitar without first asking the customer. You could do it without routing that cavity, but you'd have to take the neck off a lot. Sight the neck using a very good 12-inch straight edge. This is a Craftsman machinist edge off of a machinist square. Adjust the truss rod and see what it does. You want to know if the neck's warped, rebowed, has relief, goes straight. This is a beautiful neck. Play around with the rod and see what you can get out of it so you're familiar with it. This is going to be an easy fret job, with one exception. The exception I'm speaking of is the radius of the Fender fingerboard is more curved than a Gibson, and that's the main reason it's buzzing out. Take a thin piece of wood and drill a hole through one end and stick the drill bit into a piece of cardboard. And then mark out 7 inches and drill a hole, 10 inches and 12 inches. These notches were cut so I could get my pen down in there. If I can get some ink out of that sucker. Make yourself 3 curved lines, a 7, a 10, and a 12, and transfer that to a block of wood. Saw those out. And you'll have 3 blocks of wood that you can use as a template to see if your fingerboards, as you're shaping them, come up to snuff. A 7, a 10, and a 12. Gibson is a 12, Fender used to be a 7, and sometimes Gibsons were 10. The ones with a lot of pearl inlay especially, because the pearl was hard to sand. Clean those up with a file on your belt sander or with a drum sander on your drill press. This Fender neck is so straight that I might have fretted it without using my neck tension jig. In other words, just remove the frets, very lightly sand any chips off the board and fret it straight. It's got beautiful relief, it can be straightened out, it has fall away. On an easy neck like that, if it's a Gibson or some other type of guitar, go ahead and fret it without doing anything to it. In the case of the Fender type though, we have to change this curve. It's way too curved, which means we're going to be taking more off these areas. We won't be taking too much off the outside, but we're going to try to bring that exceptional curve down to about a 12-inch radius like a Gibson. Then it will bend easier. Ask your customer's permission first, however. But it's the only sensible way to go if you want to bend blues notes on a guitar. So I'm going to put the Fender in my neck jig, but I won't need the function of the jig as much. It will come in helpful with the Gibson later. This is the neck jig. It's a couple of pieces of plywood sandwiched together, and I have it sitting on a stand. You don't have to have the stand. You could clamp it to your bench. I'll use a couple of blocks of wood for a flat body guitar like a Fender. I'm trying to keep the neck horizontal as much as I can to those steel posts that'll ride up and down underneath it. We're going to clamp it to the jig with Jorgensen clamps or cam clamps, anything you need that'll fit in there. The plans for this jig are available if you write to me. I think just by looking at it you'll get the idea of what it is. It's very simple. Pardon the photography. I'm doing this by myself. That's a piece of 3/8 drill rod, and it's got a drill collar on it. Those are the type of stop collars that you tighten to a drill bit to keep from drilling a hole too deep. I got them from Woodcraft Supply. They hold that plastic block underneath the neck. When you get the neck adjusted the way you want it, it'll sit right on these plastic feet, and that holds it at concert pitch. I even have one for the peg head in case, like on a Gibson guitar, the peg head wants to lean backwards. Or on a Martin guitar where they have no truss rod, you can support the peg head and help to hold it at concert pitch. Line it up straight over those posts. That's very important. There's got to be absolutely on center to the center line of the neck. You'll see that later. Firmly in place. I've got a cam clamp back here because it wouldn't quite reach in on this Mustang body. I clamped the orange clamp out of my way there so my arm can sand over this fingerboard. It's fixed very tight and the fingerboard's floating free. Tune the guitar to pitch and I'll show you how to adjust these rods. First I want to adjust the neck on this to get it just where I want it. You're looking at the straight edge on the first fret. As I pull it off the fret, watch it drop to the second fret. I'll have to change the focus on all of these shots. There it drops onto the second. And we go to the third. This is what I call relief. This isn't quite enough relief, though. This is a very minute amount. It's barely dropping onto the third. By the time it gets to the fourth, there's no more relief. It's sitting right on it. Same with the fifth. That's because this neck is so beautifully straight, because I tightened the rod. Now I can fret it when it's straight and give it relief because it's got such an adjustable rod. I want you to watch the straight edge there at the third and fourth frets as I loosen the truss rod. Watch the relief that'll come into it. Here it comes. See the amount of control I have? I just gave it a lot of relief. There's the fourth fret. There's the third fret. There's the fourth. Now the fourth has relief. Fifth has relief. The sixth has relief. That's what we want. Seventh has relief. Eighth has relief. And we want it to start, let's see, there's the eighth. And the ninth fret is just getting ready to start touching again. Watch the straight edge falling from fret to fret. That's what I call relief. See it when it goes back up? This neck has wonderful relief. I want to move the straight edge to the upper register from the 9th to the 15th fret. Here we can see the frets are touching the straight edge. It's hard to see in this picture, I know. These close-ups are hard to get. When we get to about the 9th fret, it's really quite flat, and we're getting fall away towards the end of the fingerboard. Up in here, it's starting to fall away when we get to the end of that fingerboard. I'll show you right here. There's the last fret. It's barely touching. It's barely touching that one. We have drop or fall away on the last 2 frets. These close-ups, I know, are a little hard to see, but you'll see better in the next shot when we get away from this close-up. It's touching all those from the 12th fret down. That's what I'm talking about, relief. It's relieved up to somewhere in this area. It flattens out, and there's the fall away. Although that's an exaggerated drawing of fall away, it's nice if the fingerboard tongue over the body falls away a little bit. This neck is so adjustable that I'm going to fret it in its straight position like the upper drawing. I'm going to use this drawing to fret it. I'm going to fret it while it's flat, and then I can give the proper relief to it with the truss rod. I'm sort of lucky with this case. I loosen the collar with an Allen wrench and bring that shaft and its plastic foot up to touch the neck all the way down. I generally do this several times. Bring it up till it touches and ever so slightly tighten it. This is going to hold the neck in concert pitch. I think I could do this guitar without the jig at all. I just use the jig always. If nothing else, it serves as a good thing to hold the guitar. I'll show you a close-up of these plastic feet. I ground a flat on the 3/8 drill rod so that the Allen set screw will sit tight against it. Loosen the collar and you can raise the shaft and it'll run the plastic head of the shaft right up against the neck. I turned the shoulder on that to hold that plastic. I did that on the metal lathe. You don't have to do that. I could have drilled a 3/8 hole in the plastic block. It's quite adjustable. When you tighten one, you don't want to push too hard on the neck and force it off the other. I've got it sitting on 5 of the neck pillars. When I take the strings off, the neck will probably bow up a little bit because there's no string tension pulling it upwards. You'll probably see a clearance on some of these plastic heads. Let's look for that. With the string tension gone, it's lifting up off the plastic feet a very little bit. Watch what happens when I loosen the truss rod. That'll let the neck sit right back down on the feet again. There. Now that neck will be sitting exactly as it was at string tension. Let's put a straight edge on it and we'll find out. What I'm trying to tell you here is that the neck is now being supported at concert pitch, the same way it would be when the string tension was on. I know it's a little hard to understand this jig. If you have any problems, you write to me. I'll be glad to answer you. We're going to fret this neck almost perfectly straight. Take the frets out right now with a hot soldering pencil. This is a pair of end nippers. You can buy them at the hardware store and grind your own fretting cutters. I ground the face off on the grinder. If you don't have a grinder, go down to your local high school and see if you can get some help. Remove all the metal on the front and get rid of that V. It's not a bad idea to grind the inside of it, too. You could use a Dremel tool with a little grinding stone on it. I'd get the face with the grinder. There's a lot of grinding. That's the part I hit with the Dremel tool. Then you have a sharp cutting edge that doesn't bend a fret as you're cutting it. And I think that's important. Look in your list of supplies. If I can find a maker of this, I'll tell you about it. These are my nippers right there. The V that you see on the rear used to be on the front too. You can imagine what that would do. It would have to force its way through a fret. These are very sharp and do a beautiful job. We're going to remove the frets with these as well. I've got a piece of copper tubing that's pressed over the tip of my soldering pencil. I'm laying that right over the fret. You might leave it there for a minute. You'll have to learn. You can keep feeling it and see how hot it gets. You'll learn from experience how long it's going to take for the fret to get warm enough to come out. When you feel that it's hot enough, remove the heat and get right underneath the edge of that fret with your nippers and try to work it loose. Start way out on the edge. There you go. I'm under it. If it slows down on you at all as you're going across the fret, give it a little more heat. If it doesn't want to come easily, heat it up some more. Get the jaws right underneath the very outer edge. You may have to press down into the fingerboard to do it. Careful when you get to the end here, right there. Take your time, be very gentle. Sometimes it pays just to wiggle the fret ever so much. That's often where a chip will happen. Take all the frets out in this manner. Sometimes I keep the soldering pencil on the fret as I work my way across, gaining that extra bit of heat. These frets are coming out easy. Don't rush it. I'm using some 120 grit sandpaper just to clean off any crud that was under the frets. I'm not changing the shape right now. This is just a cleanup. Everything we do to the fender is going to be done exactly the same on the Gibson as far as removing the frets, jigging it, and cleaning it up. The only differences will be that we'll have to nip the ends of the frets because it's got a bound fingerboard on that Gibson, and I'm going to be showing you that later. We won't have time in this tape to do the same operation to both guitars. I'm trying to show you the key points. Just sand the dirt off so that we can check the radius with our radius blocks. I don't know what happened to the color there. Vacuum all the dust out of it. That's important. Get all the dust off of it. Bring those little radius blocks in and check your radius. This is so curved that you can't bend across that radius without buzzing out. You see, it fits the 7-inch, and I want to bring it down to a 10 or a 12. I want that radius, but this one's rocking on there. I'm going to use a scraper and some sanding blocks to get there. For your scraper blade, take a hacksaw blade, the tempered type that when you bend them they'll snap. They're usually painted red. Some blades are really cheap and they're painted blue usually. Don't use those. Break a piece off and sharpen it with a smooth mill file. I'm using the same file that we dress our frets with. You'll get a good sharp burr on the edge of that hacksaw blade, and that'll be good for scraping the fingerboard. Or buy yourself some cabinet scrapers and look in Woodcraft Supply or Garrett Wade catalog. Keep your eye on Fine Woodworking magazine articles. They're always giving you good pointers there about how to make scrapers and things like that. This neck is really straight. If I loosen the rod, I'm going to have relief. That's why it's easy to work on. It's straight. We're going to sand it in the straight position and remove some of the material on the top of the crown. Once again, you don't have to have a jig to fret this type of neck, but we're going to use it. We're going to be scraping with the hacksaw blade, sanding with the carborundum stone wrapped with 120, or you can use 80 if you want to cut fast, and we're going to go to progressively smoother papers. You may want some small blocks of wood to sand the tongue area, etc. To begin with, I'm going to mark off a patch on the center of the fingerboard, and we'll scrape that with our scraper. Lay your white on there and take the hacksaw blade and scrape from one end to the other. I'm going to take off a series of flats, and I'm holding the hacksaw blade at a slight angle. I'm right off center, picking up a little bit of the center and a little bit of the treble side. That scraper will actually take a curl of wood. Hold your hacksaw scraper at an angle and then hold it at an angle that way, pointing towards you. That's how you'll pick up that scraping action. It'll scrape that plastic pearl dot too. We're going to scrape a series of flats. There's a flat, there's a flat, and there's a flat, and then we're going to connect those flats together with a sanding block. Scrape a series of 3 or 4, 5 flats all the way across the radius of that fingerboard. Scraper at an angle, because if you don't, the straight motion will tend to pull a chunk of wood out every time you hit a fret. You can also use a bastard file and file wood down if you want to get there in a hurry. You could also use some 40 or 80 grit paper. This is 80. That'll cut it in a hurry. I'm going to keep on using my scraper. There's the 7-inch radius block. You can see how much we've taken off. I'll put on the 10-inch, and right now we have about a perfect 10. That's a really good fit. The 12-inch radius block is still a little rocky on the edges, just a taste. We've got to shape this board a little bit more. We're getting very close though. With the scraping done, it's your 120 sandpaper that'll round off any flats that might have left. You wouldn't be able to see those. This just smooths it out. The scraper got the whole board. Soak a diaper rag in some water and squeeze it out in wet sand. Go ahead and lightly dampen that rosewood and let the grain rise up a bit. Takes a minute or two to dry. I've graduated to a 180 grit. It's the free cut finishing paper, that blue paper. It doesn't load up as much as garnet or cabinet paper. I'm giving a little extra attention to the tongue up here, the last 4 inches. I scraped a little extra there. I used a smaller block and sanded a little bit extra to make sure I had a slight fall away. Go ahead and damp the fingerboard down again and let that dry. And we'll go to a smoother sandpaper. I'll finish sand with a 220 and switch to a 400 black wet or dry paper to give the rosewood a good polish. What I'm doing here is checking my fall away. I have a couple of thousandths of an inch fall away there, and that's just what I want. This board is ready to start routing the slots. There's the straight edge sitting on the tongue of the fingerboard. It's running from the 5th fret all the way to the end. It's sitting flat right in here, and there's your fall away starting. We've got about 3/1000ths of an inch of fall away. You'll be sure that those upper frets then won't buzz when the player's in the upper registers. That's what you're shooting for. I'm going to hit this with 400 one more time. As you can see here, I haven't quite removed much wood on the very edge. There's the mark from the old frets. That's because the radius was taken off on the center of the board. As we reached the edges, we gradually tapered off. The 400 left is smoothly polished. This board is ready to route the slots now. Our sanding blocks came along and removed these little points that were left from the scraper and just helped to smooth that out. I used a block of maple or beech, whatever I have around. As we get into Dremel tooling out the slots, a fret slot, usually from the factory, is cut at the same width as the tang, but the tang has a little bead or a series of beads along the edge, and sometimes that tends to force its way into the hole and back bow the neck. We're going to route it out with our Dremel tool router. We're going to start with a dental burr that's tapered. You can pick them up used from your dentist, and they work fine on wood. That'll pick up by heat any glue that's left in the bottom of the slot, and it's kind of hard to hog a bit into that first time around. That's why we want to just cut part of it. We'll follow that with a straight fluted bit that's the size of the original shaft here. That will match the tang. After that's cleaned the slot out, we're going to follow it with a larger bit that'll match the bead, so the fret will actually press right into the slot with very little effort. Because I don't usually hammer my frets in, I glue them in. You'll make these bits out of standard Dremel tool bits. What I do is take an oversized bit like this and hold it against a whetstone while it's running and grind it down to the sizes that I want. There's the tapered dental bit. It has its own collet. It's the smallest collet that comes with the Dremel tool. That's your first bit. Next to that is a number 111 Dremel bit that has been ground against your whetstone. It was ground from this bit. There's a fresh number 111. Sometimes those are going to cut too wide a slot for you. You can get a number 112 and number 13 bit also. Between the 111, 112, and 113 Dremel bit, you can make any sized bit that you wish. You'll probably end up grinding a lot of different sized Dremel bits down, and they don't last forever. The dental bits last quite a while if they're tungsten carbide. This one is obviously burnt, but it still works to pick up glue. There's a fresh number 113. That's a big bit. Next to it on the right of your screen is number 111. That's very end of that bit has been ground down to nothing, probably from use. It's hard to ground it perfectly round on a whetstone using your Dremel tool base. You just do the best you can. I'll show you how I do that. You got a bit in there in the collet and it's tightened in, and the Dremel tool is clamped in your vise or something to hold it steady, and you put the smooth side of a carborundum stone or a water stone, whatever you choose, against it. Then you turn the machine on, which I won't do. I've already ground this bit, and you can move the stone back and forth against it very carefully. I like to adjust my bit so that it's a little bit deeper than the tang. Imagine that's the tang. Go a little deeper than the tang. So if anything, you're really going to clean that slot out right down to the bottom, and nothing will keep the fret from shoving down in. Choose your fret wire. I think you should send to Jim Dunlop and get the AccuFret selection chart. They have a large one that can go on your wall. Study it carefully. To make it simple, I picked out 4 wires. 6100 on the top is the largest they have. I think that that's the super rock and roll jumbo fret. Below that is 6130. That's the closest to the Gibson fret wire you can get. Below that is 6190. That's closest to a Fender. That's what we're going to use on this guitar. Below that is a 6210, which is higher than 6190, and I'd rather use it, but it has less of a hard content. It's a 12% nickel-silver content. The others are 18%, and they last longer. When you use the softer wire, you can get by with that on classical guitars. You don't want your customers coming back in 6 months with grooves in their frets already. I've chosen 6190, and these charts are tremendous because it gives all the measurements of the fret. You can, you'll have to do this on your own. You're going to have to experiment. I'm using 6190. With the feeler gauge, measure the old slots, and I'm getting about 26 thousandths. Now I know my bit has to cut over 26 thousandths. It's a 32 thousandths slot that will fit the 6190. I'll show you on the chart. Looking for the C measurement, refer to your chart, and it reads 32 thousandths. So we have to measure a Dremel bit that'll cut at 32 thousandths. If we don't have one, we have to grind one down that size. I probably have one. I found one. I'm going to start with my dental bit, the triangular one, and get to the bottom of that slot. I'll be cleaning the glue off often. Then I'm going to go right to my 32 thousandths and skip an intermediary bit if I can. You'll gain this by experience. This one looks like it'll be a 2-bit job. You can measure the Dremel tool bit with a micrometer or a vernier caliper. We should all learn how to read those tools anyway. You can buy a caliper that has a dial readout on it. That makes it easy to read. These are plastic. They were quite inexpensive. They're not quite as accurate, but it reads right about 32 thousandths. I think these were 12 bucks. You're going to start the cut with the dental bit on the side opposite of you as you're sitting down, and draw it across towards you. Be careful as you come out. Hold it very carefully. You don't want to chip the edge of that fingerboard. Wipe the dust off and go all the way down the fingerboard. I can even hold on to the vacuum cleaner with one hand as I draw it across, and that'll pull the sawdust right out. This fret is almost perfect after the first route with the cone-shaped bit. I'll probably still use my mid-range bit to square up that slot. But always check it right after you've done your routing. If you can see that the fret's laying right down on the edge of the fingerboard, you're doing okay. The weakest part would be right there on the edge, right here. Sometimes the Dremel bit tends not to cut as deep there as you're going off the edge, so exaggerate your cut as you get to the edge. This one's laying right down. Change to the mid-size bit just to be safe, although the fret was fitting pretty well. And clean all the slots one more time, and we're ready to bend our frets. You're done routing. Scrape any excess dust or glue out of the bottoms and the sides of the slot. I want you to dig the dust off the bottom of the slot and use an X-Acto saw, or an X-Acto knife, whatever blade you're using, and scrape the side walls on each side. You'll pick up any excess glue. Go from right to left, all the way across. Now I'm cutting the frets. I leave about a half, well, no, not a half, about 1/8 of an inch overhanging each edge of the fingerboard. Somewhere between 1/8 and 3/16. We're going to hammer that down later. I'm cutting up and down like that, not sideways. That's just the way that I do it. I pick it up with my nippers and take it out of the slot, because if you leave it in the slot, it may twist on you sometimes as you're cutting it and pull out a chip of rosewood. I think that's important. And I'm cutting from top to bottom, right through the fret wire. I've got a block of wood with a series of holes drilled in it. That keeps them in their right order. I just go right around the corner with them and go down the next row and save those till I'm ready to bend and straighten them. I'm using some min wax and a Q-tip to put wax up to the edge of the fret slot. And I do wax off the whole fingerboard so it doesn't have a blotchy look. You're going to want to leave a bare area around the fret slot. That's where the tang and the fret will glue to the solid, clean wood. I'll show you what I mean. See how I wax up right close to the slot, but leave a bare area. You don't have to be too perfect, but this will enable you to clean off the 5-minute epoxy later. Since I glue these frets in 2 at a time, it's very important that I point out to you on a banjo fingerboard, you don't really have to wax it off like this unless you plan to glue them in 2 at a time. On a banjo, the fingerboard is flat, so you can put all the frets in at once using Franklin Tight Bond or a wood glue. And you'll plane a block of wood very flat and use several clamps to clamp all the frets in at once and let it dry for 24 hours. That'll hold the frets in. So as you see our fretting technique later, bear in mind that on a banjo, you don't have to glue them in 2 at a time. On the guitar, however, it's best to wax it off and use 5-minute epoxy. Wax the whole board off. I do it all at once. Get that job out of my way and let it dry. Takes a little practice to get this right. It should come fairly easy to you. Use the lid from your min wax can and warm it with your lamp. That will make the wax spread a little smoother. It's really not necessary in the summer months, though. Now would be a good time to take the guitar out of the jig if you're limited on space. You don't need the jig now. It will be used later when we have it fretted and we have to dress the frets. Or you can leave it in the jig and just lower the pillars and fret around them 1 at a time. That sort of holds the neck where it's supposed to stay, but at this point it doesn't really matter. We're not going to be forcing that neck with our frets. They're going to slide in with a press fit. I think it's a good thing to know that you can remove the guitar from the jig now if you wish. Doesn't matter. You can always rejig it later. That's the important thing. I often take it out of the jig. I don't even know right now. If I need the space, I'll remove it. Let that wax dry, and we're going to tape off a couple of these frets with masking tape. tape off the first 2 frets. So only the slot is exposed. With the fingerboard taped off, we can begin to bend our frets. We have to crown them just like the fingerboard before they go into the slots. I ground a little groove on each side of the jaws of my pliers. I use that for bending the fret. For straightening the fret, I use the regular serrated front jaw of that same pliers. Just a pair of hardware store pliers with a small groove and a large groove ground into them. I use my thumb and my index finger to put pressure on the fret. That's how I straighten them. You can walk the jaws right across. Flip it end for end and straighten that end. Sometimes you just want to give a fret a tuck. See how it bows up there? Grab it way out on the end and press on it like that. You'll get the feel for this real quickly. That's how you round the fret. You can flip it over and turn it from both sides. I hold it up there when I'm straightening a fret. When you're going to straighten a fret, use the jaws the way they came from the store with a serrated edge on them like that. It grips the edge of that crown really good, quite well. And I can give it a wiggle and straighten it. Good, thank you. You want to bend these things every 3 or 4 diamond or little beads that are on the edge of that tang. Flip it end for end and you're back into the pliers again. And bend it. Move it about that far all the way across. You can overbend a fret too. This one could use a bit more bending there. It's nicely crowned there, but it straightens out there. You don't want that little straight part. Bend it a little extra on the end. Those will fit well. You hold it at the end of the jaws to straighten it. And hold it right at you. And look at that tang, and if it looks crooked, straighten it. A little bit of pressure. Now I can put pressure up close to it, right in the middle. Flip it over. Start from that side. Get it straight and curved. As long as the frets are straight end to end and fit the curve nicely, we can mix up some 5-minute epoxy and put it in with a spatula. I don't mind if they're slightly overbent. These are a little bit overbent. I'm going to push them down later. In volume 2, we learned we could take super glue and glue plexiglass together with it. And it sets up rapidly. perhaps 5 to 10 minutes. Then these can serve as plastic gluing cauls that won't stick to glue to press these frets down in with. We're going to put a clamp on the bottom, this C block of wood. We made that quite some time ago. I'm going to lower the stud down here because it'll be in the way, and I'll clamp it right while it's in the jig. Lower that post. You can remove the top if you wish. We're just pretending here, but when we remove the frets, we're pretending that the glue is mixed. It isn't. This is a dry run. We wipe the glue in. Get plenty in, and you stick the tip of your knife into the slot and run it back and forth. You add a little bit more. Mush it down and draw it across. Clean up the excess. At that point, you remove the tape. Then you come back in with your frets. Imagine the tape being removed. Your C block will be on the bottom of the neck. The plastic block will come in with its plastic rod that's free. Now this is the one you've glued up. It's got one rod sticking to it. The other one's free, and you line them up directly overhead on the edges of the fingerboard. This block is slightly tapered too. You know how the fingerboard gets wider as you go out. You're going to put an orange clamp on that with the C block on the bottom and clamp it together. Don't forget that the fingerboard is slightly tapered as it goes towards the 12th fret. These little plastic blocks are made to allow you to do that. That one's slightly tapered, and so is that. You bring them in about the same amount as you would to file a bevel on a fret. You'll find out quickly if it wants to fall off. You'll come in with that caul on the back, and an orange Jorgensen clamp will do. You could also use a C clamp. Come straight down and tighten it. You'll learn to keep it on center. If you don't, it'll explode on you and rock off the fingerboard. I'm taking two little wooden tapered wedges and driving it underneath the fret from each edge, and that forces down the crown. There is no glue here right now. These wedges are slightly rounded away from the end grain, and they're tapered, so they push that fret down. Hold the block in place while you do it, and you'll push it in tight. You'll see the glue squeeze out. They come in with a hammer and a nail set and punching down the ends. I did not hammer these frets when I was pretending to glue them in. I will in the final glue up. I use the neck as an anvil and pound against it, but I don't want to change the shape of these frets. They're slightly over-crowned. That's what that is pushing down. Now this is it. We're going to fret this guitar starting right here, so pay attention. As a final cleanup, I wipe the bottom of the tang in case there's any oil or residue with my thumbnail and a rag on both frets. Keeping them in order, that's one, and this is two. One's a little longer than the other. Break those bubbles in the epoxy and pour out 2 equal amounts. That's important to mix it properly. I'm overdoing it here, but I really wanted you to see it. You get a feel for what are the right size bubbles. Mix those together for about a minute. You'll learn, it'll start getting warm and you better use it, but really get it mixed well. Keep flipping it over onto the plastic. Plastic is what I like to mix it on in string packages. Pieces of paper are okay too, but mix very fast because I think it might soak into that paper. Lay a bead across and pick it up and bring it over to the other fret. Work the tip of your knife down in there. There's lots of epoxy there. Pick it back up again. Pack it down in. Make sure to get it on the edges. Wipe the excess off on an edge and work it across. You don't want too much or too little. You'll have to get a feel for it. I wipe off my knife. Take a piece of paper, sandpaper will do, press that tape down onto it, and pull it off very carefully. Lay your frets in with plenty of overhang. Follow with a small hammer. Just tap them right across the arc. You'll see the glue squeeze out. Come in with your plastic caul. The wooden curved caul from the bottom. Hold it with your left hand and slightly tighten it. You may have to reach out with your fingers and shove that rod back in. You want to get it on the edges of the board, pressing down the frets. Like so. That's tight. Come in with your wooden wedges and push them in finger tight. If you push too hard, you'll lift the block off the rod. Your hammer again and the nail set. You're knocking it down at the edges. It'll hold itself down better. Good bend. That's probably enough. The wooden wedge will push the crown down in the center. You don't have to push in too hard. You'll get a feeling for it. When it scrapes up too much wood at the top there, deburr the edge of this plexiglass. This one needs a deburring. That'll press that crown down and squeeze the glue out onto the waxed board. You can see the tangs hanging out. You can see the angle that the bar's running at. And here's the angle I come in with my nippers. That's why I have this block shorter than the width of the fingerboard. You need 4 or 5 to do a neck. This block will do these 2 and probably the next 2 and start to get weak after that. You need room to cut, because you want to cut it after the glue's dried while it's still in the clamps. It helps to keep you from twisting it. Probe the glue line with your chisel. When you can start to lift up under it a little bit and it sticks together, you're almost ready to remove the clamps. 5 to 10 minutes depending on the temperature and the glue. You don't want it brittle hard like 15 or 20 minutes will do, but you want it hard enough to hold that fret in. This isn't quite ready, but almost. Cut the top of the fret first. Don't go all the way through the fret. I'm cutting the crown halfway through the fret with my nippers. It tends to bend less that way. Then I finish the cut by cutting through the tang. Sometimes you'll cut the whole thing. I got that one half of it. Pull the clamp out of your way and get it on the other side. That's why this block doesn't want to be wider than the fingerboard on these edges. Now we can unclamp it. Loosen the clamp, grab it with your right hand and release the trigger. And you won't drop your parts all over the floor there. At this stage, you're going to use a small chisel. I'm using a 1/4-inch chisel. Watch the outside edge. Don't dig in the fingerboard. Keep that slightly raised and go across the board and pick up that bead of glue. Watch that edge. Don't let it dig into the fingerboard. Keep your eye on what you're doing. I have it tilted at a very slight angle. Keep the point right down into the crotch of the fret and the fingerboard. You get a fret with an end that's really down tight, right out to the edge of the fingerboard, and it hugs the board all the way across there. We're going to continue to put these frets in 2 at a time all the way down the neck. Once again, you can remove it from the jig now if you want and finish this on your desk and get rid of the jig. Bring it out again later. Doesn't really matter to me. I hope you were paying attention there, because that is how we glue them in. That is it. I'm going to glue 2 more for you in here. This glue is really sticky. I wear these inspection gloves. You'll see me doing that a lot. Another handy item is a little finger inspection glove that dentists wear when they probe in your mouth. A couple of those are handy if you just want to put them on 2 fingers. Once again, you bend the frets. I bend them 2 at a time. While I'm doing these 2 and bending these, the 2 up here would be drying. The next, usually I'll put 2 in here and 2 up there. 2 here, 2 there. I'm working this way now just because that's what I'm doing. I've moved the guitar out of the jig onto this roll-away bench, because I'm going to put the Gibson in the jig. So while I'm fretting this, I can be adjusting the Gibson. Bend your frets. I start at the edge and work across towards the center. Flip it. There's a little bit of a kink right here. You can remove a kink. You just have to work it. Then hold it on the front of the jaws and straighten it out. Whoops. Sometimes it'll slip in those jaws. That's why you want to get that serrated edge to hold the edge of the crown itself. I'm not using my filed notch. You know, that's the notch that I filed to hold the head of the fret or the crown. While you're bending frets and mixing glue for one set, your other set's drying, and it balances itself off. It keeps you busy. Otherwise, you could have taken this block of frets and bent all of them to shape and gotten that job out of the way. Mix the glue. You can do it on plastic or paper. If you use paper, really work quickly, because I often wonder if that doesn't absorb the glue. I told you that before. I'm just reminding you. Mix it well. Just keep drawing it to center and wiping it off the blade. Be sure you have plenty down in the edges. Work it down in. You don't want it completely packed with glue, because when you try to press the fret in, it can't go in because the glue will keep it from dropping down. Wipe off the knife and set it aside. If you forget to do that, you get big globs on it. Remove the masking tape carefully. It's good to remove it on a bias or an angle. Sometimes you'll want to pull off little chips of that rosewood. It's okay, just work it off carefully. Lay your frets in. I'm removing my glove. It's got a little glue on it. Use the neck as an anvil, and you might want to hold the tip down with one finger as you tap across, just to seat them. Don't overhammer them. Lay the free stick on the treble side, the glued stick on the bass side, and come straight down with your clamp. I've got my wooden block on the back of the neck. You must keep the clamp square, both directions. If it's not on center and it doesn't clamp properly, you'll have troubles. The block down here, and it's also holding the base of the Jorgensen clamp. So my right hand can Move the block around and get it lined up on center. I'm looking directly overhead. That looks good. The dowels are running along the tapered edge of the fingerboard and pressing those ends down. Press in your wedges. I use a punch and tap down the edges, or a nail set. One good tap. You could use your hammer, but you can't always get in there with the hammer. Double check your tightness, press those wedges in, and go on to your next frets. Remember, the idea of tapping this fret end is so it really holds down tight right at the very edge. If you don't, sometimes you get a loose fret ends. If you were to really over tap it, though, then you would be prying the fret up off the fingerboard. There's just a happy medium. Try it a few times and I think you'll get the feel for it. Let these dry at least 10 minutes and go work on the other end of the fingerboard. With the fender being fretted on the other bench, I can put the Gibson Jazz archtop body into the jig. I'm using my sandbags to hold up the shoulders because it takes any irregular shape easily. I'll use a different clamping setup for this too, which I'm about to show you. You want to shift the weight in the sand in these bags until you can bring this neck almost level. If you have any problems with that, stick a board under the sandbag to raise the whole bag up. You want to work with a level neck. You could also use just one sandbag and a piece of cloth at the other end, and that'll quite quickly get the fingerboard level to the pillars. I'm putting a tapered block of wood with a pad of leather right under the edge there. Without it there, the guitar would rock because it has an arched back. See what I mean? With it in there, it'll sit tight when you clamp it. Don't clamp too tight. The whole idea is to get the fingerboard level to the jig. Level to the stud. Use a block of wood and some leather to pad the top, and don't apply too much pressure. The shim below the body holds it firmly, and the sandbag holds it there. I've got 4 Jorgensen clamps all the way around the body. Here's another method. It's a 1/2 20 fine thread, all thread rod with the shoulder turned on the top, and that's threaded right up through the front shoulders of my jig. With a tapered block with a hole in it, padded with leather, that can support the shoulders, and you can adjust it from down below. The nice thing about these is you can level the instrument with it. You can raise or lower one side and get that level top. That's the way I'm going to use. Sandbags are handy too, though. When the body's clamped in tight, check your studs and make sure they're right on center all the way down to the neck. Take the plastic foot off of it so you can see the steel shoulder line right up with that ebony inlay. See, these little shoulders have a hole drilled in the bottom of them. I mean the plastic pads have a hole drilled in them, and they sit on the shoulder. And they spin freely. And they sit square because the shoulder's turned. If you don't have a lathe and something like this, you'll have to go out and find someone that can do some turning for you. It's not that hard. Or don't cut the shoulder, just drill a hole in the bottom of that plastic the size of the steel itself. That would work also. Tune it up to pitch, which this one is. You'll notice on the close-ups that I have some bronze strings and some standard nickel strings on here. That's because I couldn't find the right gauge to match his set, and I'm just using them for their tension. That's all I care about now is the tension. I'm going to adjust this rod the best I can get it, and let's look at its relief before we set the pillar studs up. This is a beautiful guitar. You'll find that this neck has relief. It's very adjustable, but when it gets up on the tongue here, there are high frets here. It's been refretted before and it wasn't done right because someone tore the binding off to do it, and they didn't have to do that. Here's a close-up of its relief. It's flattened. To check relief, you pull the straight edge from fret to fret and watch for a drop. You can relieve it as far as you want, all the way up to the 12th if you like. Somewhere up in here it should level out, and right here it should fall away. There's some high frets in this area and I'm going to show them to you. The binding is also kind of squiggled. Someone took it off and didn't get it back on straight. We're not going to mess with that though, we're going to leave it. It's on tight and we're just going to fret this. The straight edge is running from the 7th fret all the way to the end. And the problem frets are right in here. Perhaps the wood joint here is swollen in some different way because the mahogany, the maple and the ebony are all glued together there at that juncture, and a little swelling has forced that fingerboard up. Well, someone should have planed that down when they refretted this, and they shouldn't have taken off the binding, and you won't be doing that. But those are the bad frets, the 13th and 14th in that area. Actually, it's probably the 15th. See, the straight edge is clearing the 11th and the 12th and 13th when it probably should be sitting flat at that point. It should sit flat around the 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th. It's touching that fret. That's the 15th. It's touching the 16th a little bit and it's lifting off on the 17th, 18th, 19th, and the 20th. When we remove these frets, pay special attention to that hump. I want to check the adjustment of the midpoint of the neck, 6th and 7th frets. I'm going to adjust the rod for you and watch the amount of relief we get. This is a beautifully adjustable rod. I'm loosening the rod. Look at now I'm completely loose. The rod has no tension on it, and that's way more relief than I want. That's good because I like to have some tension on the adjusting nut while it's in the jig. I could flatten this all the way out. This neck I'm going to put relief into it and leave it in there while it's in the jig, because I want it to have its relief there, and I want it to flatten out as it goes up the neck and have a slight bit of fall away. I'm going to leave about 2 or 3 thousandths relief at least. I measure 6 thousandths. That's what I have as relief. This is a heavy gauge jazz guitar. You don't need as much relief on this. You could almost have a perfectly straight neck and get no buzz because he uses a stiff action with a heavy string. On the rock and roll guitars, you may give as much as 8, 10, or 12 thousandths. You'll have to do that with filing it in the fingerboard and adjusting the neck and using your head. You'll have to experiment. Watch the relief. Drops to the 2nd, drops to the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 6th to 7th it levels out. That's okay. This is a fairly straight neck because it's a jazz guitar. This is hard doing this camera work, folks. I hope you'd appreciate it. Flat all the way up to that 15th fret, which is bad. When you bring these plastic heads on the shaft up to the neck, as you're adjusting this one, be careful that your pressure doesn't force it off of that one. That's important. You just have to keep your eye on it. What you don't want to see is this. You're raising the other one and it pushes that one off. There's no need for it. You just have to hold the collar firmly as you tighten it. This one is perfect. I like that. Now we're out of focus on those, but you get the idea. I'm adjusting my plastic rods right up underneath the neck. Then I can take the strings off. I think earlier I told you this was a 7/16 diameter drill rod. I'm sorry, it was 3/8. And I ordered 3/8 collars from Woodcraft Supply and got enough to handle all the rods. Those are stop collars that they put on a drill so when you're drilling a hole you don't drill any deeper than you wish. Then it adjusts with the Allen wrench. Once again, I have 5 pillars supporting my neck. Let's see what happens when we take off the strings. I'm loosening the E, or the heaviest, loosening the A. Oftentimes this is when the neck will pick up off of the plastic heads on your pillars. Depends on the adjustment on the neck. I have some tension on this neck. The last 3 pillars are a little loose from the neck. I'm going to loosen the truss rod a little bit and it'll lay right back down on them. Watch. There you go. That's because the truss rod didn't have the strings pulling against it, so it was backbowing the neck a bit. Remove the strings, which they are, get them out of your way, take out the frets just like we did the first guitar. No secrets here, just be careful of the plastic binding. Get them good and hot. And work them out just like we did before. Be careful along the edges of the inlay and the fret where there's a thin strip of ebony. The grain is very weak there and you can chip it out, so get the soldering pencil a little hotter than usual there. I'm going to remove all these frets and sand this board out. When I think it's important, I'll bring you back in and show you any particular differences between this and the unbound rosewood fingerboard. We have a lot more to do and we don't have a lot of time left. I'll see you in a few. An exceptional amount of green slimy crud underneath these frets. You can clean that up with a block of sandpaper or your smooth fretting file that'll get really loaded up. Get that level and look at this neck with your straight edge after the wood is smoothed. I should have told you before you jig the guitar to loosen the nut, because we will have to remove it and you don't want to be knocking it later and moving the jig. But it gives me the opportunity to show you a good way of getting out a tough customer. This is a Formica nut, as many of the old 1950s Gibsons were. Plastic would burn from this heat. I'm using my soldering pencil again. But that's a good way of getting out a stubborn nut that won't come. Heat it up a while and then you'll be able to pry it loose. I've got a padded jaw on the other side. There's relief. It's somewhat exaggerated because of that bright light behind it. It's not as great as it looks. As it's running up to the 12th fret, I'm losing it because of that hump that I told you about. There's the hump. We're going to take that pearl out before we can fret this, because it rocks there. You see that hump in there? It's very distinct. The pearl's too high. Heat it with your soldering fret remover or the actual shaft of the soldering pencil. Keep off that plastic binding. Don't burn the pearl either. Take it out with your knife. It won't come loose till it's ready, and this one is. You can slide your pen underneath it and very carefully lift it out. It's chipping on one corner there. It's very thin on that corner. You should go ahead and prepare the board as you did the other one now. Route the slots. We're going to lower this inlay when we're done getting ready to the fingerboard. When it's prepared for the frets, then we're going to put the pearl back in and give it a final sanding. Right here, it'll show you how thin the pearl was at that corner, which is why it broke. The wood is almost flush with the bottom of the pearl. Whoever fretted this before sanded a lot more off on the edges of this fingerboard than they did the top, because pearl is hard to sand. You'll also find these old pearl fingerboards like Gibson had don't quite get the 12-inch radius, because whoever was sanding it or whatever machine was going over it would load up with pearl instead of wood, and it would get dull. It wouldn't cut on the crown. This is probably a 10-inch radius because of that. This is between a 12 and a 10-inch radius. I could go with it as a 10. It wouldn't play badly. I'm going to do a little extra scraping and sanding on the pearl. It's the only way of lowering it that I know is to file and scrape it. I'm going to leave the board much the way it is. I'm scraping the dirt off. I'm going to lightly sand it. I won't change a lot of this fingerboard because it has a good natural relief. It flattened out. I've eliminated the hump almost perfectly by removing the pearl. When I drop that down in and sand the tongue, we have relief, flatten out, and fall away. We can fret it as normal. I would like to show you how to trim the frets when I put them in. We have to notch them to fit over the binding. But I want to show you something else before that. I'm going to let this sit a second and go back to the fender. Scrape the board. I've got white pencil on the ebony and black pencil on the pearl so I can see what I'm doing. The scraper and a file will cut that pearl like sandpaper won't. You can finish sand it when you're done. I'm trying to bring this down to a 12-inch radius. I'm getting there. That mill bastard file, the flat bastard file, excuse me, comes in handy also, and it really loads up. You'll have to clean it off and with your file card. Don't breathe that pearl dust. You should wear a dust mask when you do this. This last inlay has already gone through. You've got to watch for that. If it happens, remove that one too. You can keep a set of pearl blanks around that Gibson sells that'll go right into these fingerboards, or you can take a rough blank of pearl and make it yourself. Cut it from a blank. I'm going to remove this one and replace both the last inlays. Notice I dropped the switch down into the body so it wouldn't be in my way. I'm going to replace both of these pearls with my Gibson blanks. A word to the wise would be, if you had to do a lot of filing down here, heat all these pearls out carefully and remove them. Usually you can get them out and put them back in without much trouble, and they're slightly curved. These are flat blocks I have to replace these other ones with. You're going to file with that flat bastard file. That's one way of getting the pearl down. You can also use your scraper that you made from the hacksaw blade. Keep checking the radius. And you also want to remember that you're not trying to change your relief or your fall away. You're working the neck all the way down. I scrape the pearl a lot because it's very hard to sand. You scrape it and check it, scrape it and check it. After you've scraped a while, you sand it some more. At this point, I think I would have graduated from 120. I'm probably into a 200 blue or 220 blue, that free cut paper. Always use your radius block and keep watching how you're doing. You won't be touching the edges of the fingerboard very much. Periodically wet sand it, just damp it. That'll raise the wood grain a bit. This would be smooth sanding. I'm almost ready with this one. When you're routing it, be careful of the plastic binding. You have to go out to the outer edge, but you don't want to burn it. Be careful in there. It's just like routing the other slots. You might have to clean it more often if you're getting a lot of glue. Scrape it with your knife. You got to scrape the sidewalls. Get the slot clean. To replace the inlay, you use a little ruler and take your knife and cut along the original marks where the pearl was till you have a mark to see with your eye, and then you can go along that line with a chisel. I'm just squaring this one up so I can see the size of the pearl to go back in there, regardless of whether I make it or not. If I make the pearl, I'm going to make it to that same size as it was. Now I use my chisel and press down along that X-Acto knife line. Try to break the chips out. I'm going to route this out with the router anyhow. All the meat in the center of the rectangle, I'm going to tear it down real quick with my little Dremel tool. Not the same bit that I'd use for fretting though. See, it's larger and it really tears up the wood quick. There we get rid of the main meat inside, and then we can chisel the remainder out. Be sure to chisel the corners square as can be. Scrape the bottom of that. You should use a chisel that's smaller than the rectangle, obviously, or it wouldn't get in there.
I go a little deeper than the pearl too, because we're going to put it in with glue, and then you just have to press the pearl down till it flushes in. Unless you're making a new pearl, and they usually stick up a little higher than you want. Now, this is a blank that I bought from Gibson, but it's flat. So I'm going to mark along the top with this flattened pencil, and see, you can see the pencil line. That has to be filed down, because it's not radius like the board. That's handwork. Doesn't take long. I stick it to a piece of masking tape, and I stick the tape to a little block of wood. Or you can use a belt sander. You can just file that curve into it. Use a belt sander if you have one. You don't need a large belt sander either. A small one will do. You can hold it on that same block of wood. Now it's pretty flush. I may have to flush it down later, but that's darn close. You're going to tape it off just like you did a fret job. Use the same wax. Wax right up to the edges of the slot, because we're going to mix up some 5-minute epoxy and some black dye. You could use ebony dust if you wanted to, but you really don't need to. You can't see the fill anyhow. That's important though. I even wax off the pearl block so that the glue cleans up later, a little easier. Notice the chip. There was a chip in that upper corner there, and they were there when I got the fret job. I'm going to fill those chips with the same mixture that I'm mixing up here. This is Macho Blend Stain from the Star Chemical Company. If you have a chip in the fingerboard, fill it with this dust, and you might want to mix a little ebony dust for a chip to give it a little more body. Use plenty of this black epoxy filler and just press the pearl down into it. And don't worry if it oozes out a bit. It's perfectly all right, because it'll clean right up. The wax has got it all cleaned off. Pick up any excess that you can. Now I'd let that dry, at least a half an hour. This is kind of a big fill. Just let that dry a while. Then we'll come back and clean it up. That one's a little bit high. Just file it down. Keep right on the pearl. If it rocks on the pearl, you can go sideways if you want to. That wouldn't hurt anything. Damp sand it again. You can see that chipped area there. We're going to fill that with super glue, but not on this tape. You can figure that out, I'm sure. Now we have a nice flat up in the area that had the hump, and we even have some fall away. It's just perfect. This came out real well. There's your little fall away. You definitely want that on all guitars. There'd be no doubt about that. I highly recommend fall away. It was the pearl that caused the problem in the hump in that area. See that chip? If you do a chip fill, use a dovetail bit, undercut the sides like a dentist would your tooth, and it holds the fill in better. We went a little thin on that pearl at the end, but I liked the color of it, and it was original, so I did stick it back in. That's a new block that we made from the Gibson blank next to it, the whitish one. Pretty hard to see the fill on it, too. This came out well. There's a trace of it right there. We can remove this guitar from the jig now and Dremel the slots and go about fretting it as usual. The neck is prepared. Wax it off as you normally would. Keep it clean. I'll be using 6190, and the only difference between this and the Fender fret job is we have to clip and file their ends, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Originally this guitar had a thin fret that was quite tall on it. 6190 will be perfect for that. I compare the fret overhang to the end of the slot by the binding and count in by full diamonds. I'd say 1 diamond, 2 diamonds, and a half, and that's where I cut with my nippers. 1 diamond, 2 diamond, and a half. Right there. That's the first cut. The first cut cuts to the line and separates the bead from the tang. 1 diamond, 2 diamonds, and a half.
The second cuts the tang, and you can work that piece out of there. I always cut my first notch on the base side after counting diamonds and flip it over to the treble side and line it up with the binding on that side and count diamonds again on the base side and nip it again. At that point you could flip the fret end for end, it wouldn't matter, but it's easier than trying to count diamonds on both sides. There's always a little tang on the bottom of that crown, and I first remove that. Everyone has their favorite file for doing this. As soon as it's smooth, very carefully get the end. I even angle the end a little bit. I definitely don't want it to push the binding out. Do both ends that way. I hold my frets in my Craftsman drill press vise. It's sturdy jaw and it works perfectly. File all your fret ends that way, and then the fret will fall in just like our other ones did. If you learn to use that feeler gauge and the micrometer like we all should learn to do and measure your tang of the fret and the slot it's going in, it's fine with me if you fret this guitar the old-fashioned way by hammering them in and not routing the slots. That often works well too. If you choose to hammer them in, be sure that you support it on your bench vise or a block of wood. Then you could use Franklin Tight Bond or a wood glue and just hammer them in. I know people that hammer them in with white glue and use rubber bands to hold their ends down. It works all right. My method is the best for a perfect fret job. Just want to give you some ideas, however. Since I finished fretting the fender and strung it back to pitch, it's playing pretty well. I decided to put it back in the jig and readjust the neck, just as we did before we fretted it. Readjust all my feet and give it a very light dressing, using my smooth dressing file to level the frets, and then we're going to crown them. That makes for a perfect fret job. Hold your file at a very shallow angle so that it's the only thing that touches the frets when you level it. You've seen that in an earlier volume. To file the bevel, let your fingers hang over the file a bit so that they guide you along the fingerboard, and hold that file at somewhere between a 30 and a 45-degree angle. It's your choice, and file a bevel on all the ends. Hold the square file, the file perfectly square to the edges to get the end of the tang that might be hanging out of the slot. Flat file the tangs and bevel the ends of the frets. You can remove the neck from this body if the body gets in your way. With the bevels filed, I'm ever so lightly leveling the tops of all these frets with my fret leveling file. I'm going to follow that with some 200 and some 400 blue free cut paper. Remember, this neck was so beautifully straight that I've fretted it and I'm dressing it in the straight position because I can control the amount of rebow or back bow and neck adjustment relief with the truss rod. If that hadn't have been the case, there are times when you can actually dress relief into the frets themselves.
That's the end of the file that I ground off the 10-inch file. I use that for maybe filing a little fall away into it if it was a little shy of fall away, or if I'm trying to file relief into the center of the board on 2 or 3 frets. Grind it smooth and round on the edges like we did the other one. That's just a smooth mill file, 10 inches long. It's called a mill bastard.
That's how I do my fret ends. I don't like to bevel them too much. There's the smallest amount taken off the top of these frets and they're ready to dress. This is going to be an easy one to dress. I think I'll probably just use my 3-cornered file alone. Don't over bevel these, you don't need to. There's the flat edge right there. And we're trying to bring that to round from this side up and from that side up.
roll the file. Come in from each side and roll it to center. File that into that bevel till it shines. Just take off any rough marks and roll the edges of that so there's no picky burrs on it. That's called rounding the fret ends, remember? When the ridge has disappeared and it's been brought to center, take your 400 and 600 wet or dry and give it a good sanding. Get your fingernail right in against the fret, or the thumbnail works great. You can sand right over the end of that with your 400 and 600 and follow that with the finest steel wool you can get. This is a 4-0. I'll often steel wool the fingerboard a bit too, going this direction when I'm done. Polish up that wax. Polish every fret until they're beautifully smooth and the ends feel very comfortable. They shine like that. You're trying to bring this flat area to center from both sides. The side towards the nut I call the down side, and I round from the down side in, and towards the body is the up side. You flip your file off and you roll from the down side to the up side. Sometimes you turn the whole file and get on a new side so you don't clean it so much. I'm on the down side, I'm on the up side. Straight strokes. Once in a while you'll cross file it at an angle if you want to just pick up one small area. You're trying to bring that shiny area all the way to center. Be careful on this front edge though. Sometimes the file tends to overbear there and you file more than you mean to on the very last 1/8 or 1/16 of an inch. Watch out. File down on the end of the fret, right where we beveled it, and slightly round off that bevel so there's no picky burrs. Careful of that fret end, that's the danger spot. You don't want to overfile the ends. Well, just keep rounding to center till the whole fret is almost shiny, then we'll polish it with 400, 600 and steel wool. Use your finger as a guide. I think this is about ready to sand. Filing the bevel is always a downstroke, and you push downwards as you round the whole end of that fret. Don't try to come up on the fret. That would create a burr. We're trying to get rid of burrs. 400, use your thumbnail and press it along the sides. Left hand does the other side. Then your finger on the top, index finger is good, and don't be afraid to roll over the ends and buff them down a bit. Follow that with your 600 and the 4/0 steel wool. I want to interrupt a second here on that fender job and show you something that happened here this afternoon while it's still fresh in my mind. I had a warped fender base neck and I straightened as best I could using a couple of shims and a block of wood on the top and a clamp like we did in volume 2, bread and butter jobs. That didn't alleviate the problem. I still had a hump to deal with. The neck was straight here, but I had the bad hump up there on the body joint. So I took out the last 6 or 8 frets. I've taken out 6 at this point. I'll scrape it with my hacksaw blade and sand it and put the frets back in. So take them out real carefully. This is what I call a partial refret. Why refret the whole guitar? The neck's all right, it just has a little hump there. Having never done this to one of these newer jazz basses, I took my razor knife and cut around the pearl and pried it out. I was very careful about it. Then I found that the pearl was so thick, it's plastic of course, and the slot was so deep I needn't have done that. I could have scraped that pearl just as it was. You should still use your own best judgment on a case like that. Keep the frets that you took out in order that you took them out, because there's nothing wrong with them. I was very careful not to scar them up. When I'm done scraping and sanding this board, I'll put the frets right back in and we'll have a flat neck with a little bit of fall away. I just thought you might want to see that. It gives you an idea, doesn't it?
On banjo and mandolin, since they're a flat fingerboard, I use wooden C blocks with Jorgensen clamps to clamp a flat waxed board to the frets and let it dry for 24 hours. Give them good cleanup along the edges. It'll keep squeezing out a bit on you. Just put that aside for a day or two and let it dry. Tight bond holds those frets in well, especially if we've done a good job routing them. You know, a fret job makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it? This guitar is playing real smoothly now. I can bend the strings again when I couldn't before because we changed the radius. We're at the end of Volume 4, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm sure you probably learned something, and I hope I'll see you in Volume 5. Thank you.